In the bustling city of Lagos, where the noise of the traffic never seemed to fade and the air always smelled faintly of fuel, a young girl named Gbubemi started her journey. She was just 19, fresh out of secondary school, with big dreams and the weight of her family's expectations resting squarely on her shoulders. Her family lived in Surulere, a densely populated part of Lagos where life was tough and opportunities were few. But Gbubemi was determined to carve out a future for herself that was better than the one her parents had struggled through. Her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Ego, were hard-working but poor. They had always done their best to provide for Gbubemi and her 3 younger siblings, but the reality of their financial struggles was undeniable. Mr. Ego worked as a mechanic, and Mrs. Ego sold vegetables at the local market. But even with both of them working, it was hard to make ends meet. The family often went to bed with empty stomachs, and the small, cramped house they lived in was falling apart. Despite these challenges, Gbubemi had always been hopeful. She had done well in school, and she dreamed of one day attending university, though she knew that was unlikely given her family's financial situation. She was the first in her family to finish secondary school, and she had big dreams. Dreams of becoming someone important, someone who could help her family out of poverty. When she landed a job as a personal assistant to Kofi Babagana, one of the richest men in Lagos, it felt like a stroke of luck. Kofi was a self-made millionaire, known for his sharp business acumen and his real estate empire that spanned across Nigeria. His name was often in the news, associated with big business deals and philanthropy. He was admired by many and envied by just as many. At 45, Kofi had everything a man could want: wealth, power, and respect. He owned multiple properties in Lagos and beyond, drove the latest cars, and lived in a mansion that many could only dream of. But beneath his public persona, there was a side to Kofi that not many knew about, a side that was lonely and deeply unsatisfied. Despite all his success, he had never found love or settled down. Many women had come and gone from his life, but none had stayed long enough to break through the walls he had built around his heart. Gbubemi started her job at Kofi's company with nervous excitement. She had heard stories about how demanding Kofi could be, how he expected nothing but excellence from his staff. But she was determined to prove herself. She worked hard, arriving at the office early and leaving late, always eager to impress her boss. At first, their relationship was strictly professional. Kofi was cordial but distant, treating her like any other employee. But over time, something shifted. Kofi began to notice Gbubemi more. She was different from the others. There was an innocence about her, a sincerity that he found refreshing. She didn't try to impress him with flattery or false charm. She was just herself. And slowly Kofi found himself drawn to her. It wasn't long before Kofi and Gbubemi's interactions became more personal. It started with small gestures, a smile here, a compliment there. Kofi would often ask her how her day was going, or how her family was doing. At first, Gbubemi was cautious. She knew her place. She was just a personal assistant, and Kofi was her boss. But as the weeks passed, she found herself feeling more comfortable around him. One evening, after a long day at work, Kofi invited Gbubemi to stay a little longer for a celebration. He had just closed a major business deal that would bring in billions of naira, and he wanted to share the moment with her. The office was nearly empty with only a few employees left, and Kofi poured 2 glasses of champagne. "To our success," he said, handing her a glass. Gbubemi hesitated. "Sir, I'm not sure I should—" "Come on, Gbubemi," Kofi said with a smile. "Just 1 glass. We've worked hard. And you deserve to celebrate too. She smiled shyly and took the glass. They clinked their glasses together and took a sip. As they sat in his spacious office with the lights of Lagos twinkling through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the atmosphere shifted. The conversation turned from work to more personal topics. Kofi talked about his childhood, how he had grown up in a poor family much like hers, and how he had worked his way up to the top. He spoke of the loneliness that came with success, how everyone expected him to be perfect, and how he had never found anyone who truly understood him. "There's something about you, Gbubemi," Kofi said softly, his eyes locking with hers. "You make me feel at ease." Gbubemi felt her heart race. She had always admired Kofi from afar, but hearing him speak so candidly made her feel a connection to him she hadn't expected. She had never seen him as anything more than her boss, but now, sitting so close to him, she felt something shift inside her. "I'm just your assistant," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Kofi reached out and gently touched her hand. "You're more than that to me, Gbubemi." Her breath caught in her throat. She knew this was crossing a line, but she couldn't pull away. She had never felt this way about anyone before, and the intensity of the moment overwhelmed her. Before she knew it, they were kissing. It was soft at first, hesitant, but then it deepened into something more passionate. Gbubemi's mind raced. She knew this was wrong, that she shouldn't be doing this, but in that moment it felt right. All the feelings she had buried came rushing to the surface, and she couldn't resist the pull between them. That night, they made love in his office. A night that neither of them had planned, but neither could stop. It was thrilling, exciting and dangerous, and in the back of her mind, Gbubemi knew that this would complicate everything. After that night, everything changed. Kofi and Gbubemi began a secret relationship, carefully hidden from everyone in the office. They would exchange glances during meetings, share quiet moments when no one was around, and occasionally sneak off to spend time together after work. It was thrilling, and for a while, they were both swept up in the excitement of it all. But Gbubemi couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She knew that Kofi was under immense pressure to maintain his public image, and she didn't want to be the cause of any scandal. They were from two completely different worlds. She was just a poor girl from Surulere, and he was a wealthy businessman with a reputation to uphold. But despite her reservations, she couldn't deny her feelings for him. Kofi, on the other hand, was falling for her in ways he hadn't expected. He had always been careful about relationships, never letting anyone get too close. But with Gbubemi, things were different. She made him feel alive in a way he hadn't felt in years. She wasn't after his money or his status. She was genuine, and he found himself drawn to her sincerity. For months they continued their secret affair, and as time went on, their bond grew stronger. But deep down, Gbubemi knew that it couldn't last forever. It was a rainy morning when Gbubemi woke up feeling nauseous. She had been feeling off for days, tired, dizzy, and strangely emotional. At first, she thought it was just the stress of work. But as the days passed, the symptoms got worse. She missed her period, and her mind raced with the possibility that she might be pregnant. She didn't want to believe it at first. It couldn't be true. She was just 19, too young to be a mother, and certainly not ready to face the reality of having a child with a man like Kofi. But the signs were all there, and after a week of worrying, she went to a clinic to get tested. The result was positive. Gbubemi's heart sank as the nurse handed her the test results. Pregnant. How could this be happening? She wasn't ready for this. She had plans for her future, plans that didn't involve becoming a mother at such a young age. And Kofi, how would he react? Would he be angry? Would he want the baby? She had no idea. For days, Gbubemi struggled with how to tell him. She didn't know what to expect, but she knew she couldn't keep it a secret from him. Kofi had a right to know, and she needed his support. But every time she thought about how to break the news, she felt a wave of fear wash over her. Finally, after much deliberation, she gathered the courage to tell him. It was a Friday evening, and the office was quiet as most of the employees had already left for the weekend. Gbubemi knocked on Kofi's office door, her heart pounding in her chest. "Come in!" Kofi's voice called from inside. She entered the office, her hands trembling as she shut the door behind her. Kofi looked up from his desk, sensing that something was wrong. "What is it, Gbubemi?" he asked, his brow furrowed in concern. She took a deep breath, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm pregnant." For a moment there was silence. Kofi stared at her, his expression unreadable. He stood up from his desk and walked over to the window, his back turned to her. The weight of the moment hung heavy in the air. After what felt like an eternity, Kofi spoke, his voice cold and distant. "This wasn't supposed to happen." Gbubemi's heart sank. She had hoped for a different reaction, one of understanding, of support. But the man standing before her now was not the same man she had grown close to over the past few months. "I know," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But it did. And I need your help." Kofi turned to face her, his expression hard. "I can't deal with this right now, Gbubemi. You have to leave." Gbubemi's eyes widened in disbelief. "What do you mean? Are you firing me?" "I'm sorry," Kofi said, his voice emotionless. "But I can't afford a scandal. You need to go." Tears welled up in Gbubemi's eyes. "Kofi, please, I didn't plan this. I need you. I can't do this alone." But Kofi's mind was made up. He couldn't risk his reputation, his business, or his public image. He had built his empire on being untouchable, and this was a threat to everything he had worked for. "I'm sorry," he repeated, avoiding her gaze. "You need to leave." Heartbroken and devastated, Gbubemi packed up her things and left Kofi's office that night, the weight of her situation crashing down on her. She was pregnant, jobless, and completely alone. In the months that followed, Gbubemi's life took a drastic turn. Without a job, she struggled to make ends meet. She moved back in with her parents in Surulere, who were shocked and disappointed when they found out she was pregnant. Her father in particular was furious. "How could you let this happen?" Mr. Ego demanded, his voice filled with anger. "We raised you better than this, Gbubemi. Who is the father?" But Gbubemi couldn't bring herself to tell them the truth. How could she explain that the father of her child was a man as powerful as Kofi Babagana, a man who had abandoned her the moment she told him she was pregnant? "I don't want to talk about it," she said quietly, avoiding their questions. Her mother, on the other hand, was more compassionate. Mrs. Ego knew that her daughter had made a mistake, but she also knew that she needed support now more than ever. "We'll figure it out," Mrs. Ego said, placing a comforting hand on Gbubemi's shoulder. "You're not alone in this, Gbubemi. We'll get through it together." As the months passed, Gbubemi adjusted to her new reality. She found small jobs here and there to support herself, but it was never enough. She often went to bed hungry, her body exhausted from the weight of pregnancy and the stress of her situation. But through it all, she remained determined to give her child the best life possible. When her son, Telga, was born, everything changed. Holding him in her arms for the first time, Gbubemi felt a surge of love unlike anything she had ever experienced. Despite all the challenges she had faced, despite the abandonment and the struggles, Telga was her joy. He gave her a new sense of purpose, and she vowed to raise him with all the love she had in her heart. 20 years passed, and Telga grew up to be a fine young man. He was intelligent, kind, and hardworking, much like his mother. Despite the difficulties they had faced, Gbubemi had done her best to give him a good life. She had worked multiple jobs, sacrificed her own dreams, and poured all her love and energy into raising him. Telga had always known that his father was a man of great importance, though his mother had never told him the full story. But as he grew older, he became more curious about the man who had abandoned them. He knew that his mother had struggled for years to raise him on her own, and though she had never spoken ill of his father, the pain of his absence was clear. One evening, Telga was attending a charity event in Lagos when he spotted a familiar face in the crowd. It was Kofi Babagana, the man he had only seen in newspapers and on television, the man who was his father. Telga's heart raced as he watched Kofi give a speech about his success and his philanthropic efforts. The resemblance between them was undeniable, and Telga knew without a doubt that this was the man his mother had told him about. After the event, Telga approached Kofi, his emotions swirling inside him. He had waited his whole life for this moment, and now that it was here, he wasn't sure what to say. "Mr. Babagana," Telga said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "My name is Telga. I think you knew my mother, Gbubemi Ego." Kofi froze, his eyes widening in shock. The name Gbubemi stirred memories he had tried to bury for years. He turned to face Telga, and in that moment he saw the truth in the young man's face. The same eyes, the same features, this was his son. "Gbubemi," Kofi whispered, his voice filled with regret. Is she still alive?" Telga nodded. "She's alive, but she struggled for years to raise me on her own. She told me everything." Kofi's heart sank as the weight of his past mistakes came crashing down on him. He had abandoned Gbubemi, left her to raise their child alone, and now, standing before him, was the son he had never known. "I'm sorry," Kofi said, his voice trembling. "I never meant to." But Telga interrupted him, his voice cold. "You abandoned us." Kofi looked down, guilt washing over him. "I know, and I've regretted it every day since. I was a coward, Telga. I was afraid of losing everything I had worked for, and in the process I lost something far more important, my family." Telga stared at him for a long moment, his emotions conflicted. He had dreamed of this moment for years, confronting the man who had left them behind. But now, standing face to face with his father, he didn't know how to feel. "Do you want to see her?" Telga finally asked, his voice softening. Kofi nodded, his eyes filled with tears. "Yes, I need to make things right." A few days later, Kofi stood outside Gbubemi's modest house in Surulere, his heart pounding in his chest. He hadn't seen her in over 20 years, and the guilt of what he had done weighed heavily on him. How would she react? Would she forgive him? Would she even want to see him? He knocked on the door, and after a few moments, the door opened. There she was, Gbubemi. She looked older, thinner and more worn down by life than he remembered. But her eyes were the same eyes that had once looked at him with warmth and affection. For a long moment they just stared at each other, neither knowing what to say. Then, finally, Kofi spoke, his voice filled with emotion. "I'm so sorry, Gbubemi," he said, his voice shaking. "I was a fool. I've lived with this regret for 20 years. Please forgive me." Tears filled Gbubemi's eyes, but she didn't speak. Instead, she stepped aside, and allowed him to enter her home. They sat down, and Kofi explained how he had never stopped thinking about her, how he had regretted his decision every day, and how he wanted to make things right. "I didn't want your money, Kofi," Gbubemi said softly. "All I ever wanted was for you to be there for our child." Kofi's heart broke at her words. "I know, and I failed you, but I want to make things right now, if you'll let me." Just when Kofi thought things might finally heal, Gbubemi revealed a shocking secret. "Kofi, there's something you don't know," she said, her voice trembling. "I have cancer. I've been fighting it for the past 2 years, and I don't have much time left." Kofi's world shattered once again. This time he wasn't going to run. He vowed to take care of Gbubemi and their son Telga for as long as he could. The love that had once bloomed between them had never truly died. And now in their final moments together it blossomed once more. In the end, it wasn't just about making up for lost time. It was about forgiveness, about love that never truly left, and about healing the wounds of the past. Kofi, now a changed man, dedicated his life to being the father that Telga deserved. And he made sure that Gbubemi's memory would live on forever. One of the key lessons learnt from the story is the consequences of abandonment. Kofi's decision to abandon Gbubemi after she becomes pregnant leads to years of pain and hardship for both her and their son Telga. The story teaches that actions have long-term consequences, and avoiding responsibility can harm not just individuals, but entire families. I hope you enjoyed the tale. If so, please like the video, share it with your family and friends, comment on it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell for more enchanting tales like this one. Goodbye.